This is a culture crisis, and I'm not going to talk about politics. I'm not going to talk about law. I'm not going to talk about what should and shouldn't be. But I'm asking the question, and I think that as a parish, as a and the statistics say, in the majority of people, not to mention 14 or 94%, the majority of people, we'll just say, have been either exposed or are actively struggling with this. And so for me, I think it's the way that I say it is that pornography is consuming us and coming after us and hunting us down, as opposed to us necessarily going to find it. It's seeking out children. It's seeking out teenagers. It's seeking out men and women, seeking out everybody. And it's geared towards, if those of you who understand just the basics of PR, the basics of how to sell something, the basics of how do we sell something better, they're going to exploit. They're going to, they have people who are hired who work professionally in order to have people trapped in this or have people stuck in this, right? Have your kids or grandkids stuck in this. And so it's a very important topic. The way that I phrase it is, how do we respond to something that's actively seeking us out, actively trying to hunt us down or trying to consume us? It's more of a crisis than anything else. Yeah, I think that's the question that I have as a church is how can we first get rid of this topic as something that's taboo and move forward. And from the pulpit, from my position at church, it's not something that I'm trying to talk about because it can do damage. It can be it's a very sensitive topic to talk about with kids, and so I try to leave that into the hands of parents, family members, etc., grandparents, godparents, as opposed to from the pulpit, from the AMBO, or as a priest to speak to it necessarily there, because it can kind of start to tangle it. That's my personal position when it comes to this, speaking from it with a microphone. Now, so the 3 bullet points that I have for this evening is: what is the situation, what is the hope, and how do we respond? What is the situation? What is the hope? How do we respond? If you get nothing from this, please go to our website, transfiguration.com/safehaven. The idea here, this was pushed by the Archdiocese of Atlanta and the U.S. Catholic Church. Safe haven, creating homes that are a refuge, that are a safe haven, that are a safety, creating places that have the culture of safety as opposed to not. So safe haven, that's what that means. So please go to that if you can. So what are the structure here? What is the situation? What is the hope? How do we respond? The situation. So like I said, 94% of children are exposed to pornography by the age of 14. This is on computers, this is on cell phones, this is on tablets, etc. It's everywhere. But there's 3 things, I would say, there's 3 things that pornography does. The situation. Pornography affects our relationship with ourselves. It reflects our relationship with one another, and it affects the world, ultimately. So it's a multifaceted issue. It's a multifaceted problem. It affects our relationship with ourselves. What does that mean? For one thing, it changes the brain patterns, right? So dopamine is released in your brain whenever you are having fun, whenever you are interested in something, whenever you're, for example, sex, running, eating, there's dopamine being released in your brain, and so this is something that is good. However, just like any kind of drug, drugs actually release so much dopamine that it feels so good, but the issue is that now your brain adapts to the amount of dopamine that you've had. And so the issue there becomes, okay, now I not just want it, but now I want it and I need it. And so there begins to be problems when it comes to that of compulsion, of addiction, of needing something, needing some sort of this dopamine release, needing that kind of pleasure. Particularly whenever we are in situations of loneliness, I want pleasure, or stress, I want pleasure, or maybe you have anxiety with your work, I want pleasure, or a relationship, having struggles there, and you look to something for pleasure. Some people do it with alcohol, some people do it with drugs, other people do it with pornography, and it's something that is very hard to break free from. So it affects our relationship with, it affects our own selves, it affects our brains, but it also causes, like I said, it causes this depression, it causes isolation, and it causes even more stress. So you're responding to depression by using pornography, but then that pornography is causing more depression. You're lonely, and so you go to pornography for that dopamine kick, but that dopamine kick is actually causing even more loneliness and isolation. Or with stress, now as an individual who is stressed out, and then you begin to use pornography as your stress release, now that's how you stress release. And so how do we break from that in order to retrain our brain to stress release in other healthier ways that are good for us? So it affects ourselves. And it affects ourselves, it affects our relationships. So oftentimes we think of pornography as something that is that we don't want our kids to do, and then maybe we ourselves are trying to combat it. But when it comes to individuals in relationships, this is often a very big factor. So, for example, it's not all men look at pornography, and not all women don't look at pornography. But a lot of times it's the man, a lot of times it's not the woman. But there is a situation where there are a lot of situations where it's the woman and not the man, etc. But just for example, the man in the relationship, say he's staying up at night looking at pornography, trying to get this dopamine kick, trying to have fun, pleasure, and his wife doesn't know, and he's addicted, or at least goes to that stress release as often as he can. And so now there's this complex relationship situation. The woman doesn't know, the wife doesn't know, the significant other doesn't know, and what does the husband do? There's an aspect of shame involved, right? Shame as in like, well, I don't want to share something like this with them because then they won't love me, or then they will feel that I betrayed them, etc. And yeah, that's actually probably true. And so it's a very complicated reality, but it affects the way that just practically the relationship is. All of a sudden, I mean, many of you would agree that in relationships, it's not good to hide things, right? And this is something that's often hidden because it's something that can be hidden. It's something that you can do in private. Nobody is asking the question. Nobody is talking about it. Nobody is trying to shine a light on it. And so it often goes very hidden. And so one of the things that I think it's good to point out is that since this is so common, I would, like I said, the attempt is to make it so that it's not taboo, so that, okay, well, this isn't just like something that you're doing because you don't love me. This is something that, this is a crisis that you're in. This is a situation that you're probably stuck in. Like any addiction, like any thing that we lean on too much. But there's a lot of shame involved. There's a lot of taboo involved. But I believe that somehow we have to break down that wall of shame and that wall of it being such a taboo topic. It affects our relationship with others also in the sense of it distorts our understanding of love. So, as you can imagine, as Christians, we believe we talk about love in a very particular, a very specific way. Love is something that is geared towards the other person. This is what all of our morality is geared towards. It's in this context. Love is me giving myself to another person so that that person may live, so that that person can receive a type of love that I know to be true because Christ revealed this kind of love on the cross, etc. So as Christians, we believe in a very particular, specific kind of love. However, with pornography and with everything that's kind of a part of this culture as well, is that there's a distortion there where we are now focused on ourselves, and then we're also focused on how do we get pleasure from that individual. So now it's a distortion of how at least we understand love to be as Christians. It's a distortion because the individual no longer becomes or no longer is, how do I love this individual? How do I kind of will the good for them or will them to be able to thrive? But now it's how can I get pleasure from these other individuals? How can I get the most pleasure from this person? How can I have such a dopamine kick that I'm basically in ecstasy from this other individual? And so there's a lot of stuff that's involved in this. There's a lot of dating apps that are geared towards using other individuals. There's a lot of prostitution that's connected to pornography. There's a lot of human trafficking that's connected to pornography because you go from a simple video, you go from watching pornography, looking at pornography, kind of having this habit of it. But then there's individuals who now they want to do that which they're seeing in these videos. And so you go to prostitution, you go and you find other individuals, or you do this with your significant other, or you go and you cheat on your significant other. It distorts our understanding of humanity. It distorts our understanding of our neighbor. It distorts our understanding of others. And so it's a crisis in that sense too, because not only is it changing our brains on how we operate, like this dopamine kick or this dopamine fix, but now as well, it's changing our ways that we see other people. And so in Christianity, what we talk about everyone has dignity, and how do we love every single individual and will the good, love them, give ourselves to these other people, our neighbors. And this is kind of the sin against them. This is a sin against them, is to use them, to objectify them, to turn them into an object for my own pleasure that I can go to whenever I want. Like I said, we're talking about pornography specifically, but there's also a connection with prostitution. There's also a connection with human trafficking. I was talking to Breon this morning, and I asked him the question, what is the connection? Because he does prostitution ministry in Atlanta. What is the connection between prostitution and pornography? And he says most individuals who are involved in prostitution will be exploited in pornography. They're vulnerable individuals, they're sold, and there's money in pornography. So there's a connection there. I also heard a statistic this morning when it comes to the amount of videos that are on one website. So say you watch pornography, you watched a video, and you didn't stop. There's enough diversity on one website for you to continue for 115 years. In one website, there's enough diversity, there's enough videos, and if you never put it down, you never stopped, every minute of every hour of every day of every week, for 115 years, there's enough content on there for an individual. And so even there's a lot of research as well when it comes to, like I said, it affects the way that we see other individuals. So now the situation is, it's a very new situation, I would say, that has come about because of pornography is that pornography is now very aggressive. It's now very violent. And so not only are we looking for other individuals or other people to pleasure us or to find pleasure in them, but now there's a what do you call it, a cause and effect? There's a demand, there's a supply and demand. Right, exactly. So there's a demand for violent pornography. There's a demand for pornography that involves situations of rape. There's a demand for videos that kind of are dramatized in the sense where people are acting as if they're raped or acting as if they're being hurt or whatever. And then there's actual stuff that people are getting hurt. And so this wouldn't sell if people didn't want it. And now it's selling, and people and the industry, the pornography industry, realize that this is a big seller, and so you make more of it, right? So not only is it affecting our own brain with the dopamine, it's also affecting our relationships with other individuals and how we see them, but now it's affecting our culture. Now it's affecting our world. Now there is like I said, there's dating apps, there's bigger, better, more efficient websites, more discreet websites, and now there's also a supply for all of the demand. There's more content out there that people are now looking for. And so that kind of inadvertently affects our own culture, because now you have teenagers who, for example, teenagers, don't want to call them out, but just as an example, now you have kids or teenagers and they see some very hardcore pornography, and now they think that this is acceptable, that this is what love looks like, that this is permissible. When we talk about consent, this is a big thing. The Me Too movement that happened, as political as that was, there's a reality there that women or individuals are actively sought out, taken advantage of, and abused and not given consent. I know this. I work with people who this has happened to, and so I understand that, yes, there may not be a direct correlation with every single person that there's violent pornography and that leads to this, but there's a lot of consistency there. And it's a sad reality. But it affects our world, and it affects our culture. And so now, like I said, there's dating apps where individuals are seeking out other individuals to do the stuff that they are learning on these videos, on these websites. And so it's changing how we view sex. As Christians, we view sex as a good thing, as something that's holy, sacred, beautiful, but there's a capability of that being completely distorted and changed, which, like I said, is something that I believe that we ought to combat as a parish, as a community. How do we create a subculture? This is how I think. How do we create a subculture of individuals pioneering this topic? If we look out into the world, who is doing anything about this topic? Right? There's a few websites, there's a few organizations, nonprofits, etc., but they're not huge in the culture. And so how do we, as a culture, how do we create a subculture, a culture within a culture? How do we create a subculture that people look at and they say they're doing something about it? And I may not agree with it, I may believe this, but they're doing something about it. Or you have the individual walking off the side of the street, they stumble into church and they recognize that, oh, they're doing something about this that I've always struggled with, or I have struggled with it since I was 8 years old or 14 years old, etc. Pornography is consuming us as opposed to us necessarily trying to seek it out and consuming it. There's a demand, and so there's a supply. All right, so that's enough of the situation. I probably went over time on that. That's the situation, and many of you, if you're familiar with the situation, you probably agree that it's as terrible as it sounds, and it is. But again, in my mind, like, how do we get past the taboo? How do we tear down the shame? And instead of pointing at it and saying this is terrible, or pointing at people and say you shouldn't do it, how do we welcome them and embrace them and brush them off and kind of dignify them? I heard a definition recently of shame, and shame is what was that definition? I don't think I have it here. Shame is the feeling that you are not worthy of someone else's love. Shame is the feeling of not feeling worthy of someone else's love. And so we see this in terms of God. So for an individual who watches pornography, they probably most likely have this sense of shame. If they're a Christian, they'd have this sense of shame with God. Well, I'm not worthy because I keep doing this, or I'm not worthy because I can't break away from this. Or in a relationship, or if you're single, just having this sense of shame. Well, I'm not worthy of somebody else. And so the shame itself kind of makes the individual continue with using the pornography, because it kind of instills this lie that, okay, well, you aren't worthy to receive the love of somebody else, and so you just kind of do your own thing here, or you seek out someone to use here, because when it comes to a relationship, you're not, you have this sense of shame of unworthiness to love or to be loved. Yeah. So, again, that's what is the situation. What is the hope? So this is, again, like, I'm not sure if you have met anybody who has struggled with pornography and then has overcome it and has found a sense of freedom and a sense of healing and is working through it. When it comes to alcoholics, we've all met somebody, or we know somebody who is the success story, and it's so powerful. There's nothing more powerful than witness, than testimony. But when it comes to pornography, there's a sense of shame, of taboo. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to share that part with other people. And so I believe that as this subculture, as this culture, as church, how could we foster this place where other individuals can resonate, can find refuge, who are struggling with pornography? Maybe they're trying to overcome it. And how can we as a culture, as a subculture, as a parish, have people who witness to this reality? Witness to, yes, I did grow up with this, or yes, I was exposed to this, but now I found this freedom. And the freedom, I believe, I know to be true, is something that is available to every single individual. And alcoholics would say the same thing. Freedom is possible. It's hard. Freedom is possible, but it's hard. Healing is possible. It's hard, but it's possible, and it's available. And as Christians, we believe that the same power that resurrected Jesus Christ is the same Spirit, the same power that is available to us at our own disposal. So the same Spirit that has risen an individual from the grave is the same power that we're able to tap into ourselves. And so there's unlimited possibility when it comes to freedom, when it comes to healing. For example, just a side note, when we talk about nonviolence, we often talk about Jesus as a nonviolent teacher, and this is another topic that's not necessarily talked about in our culture, because we're a very powerful nation, right? And so when we talk about nonviolence, what do we mean? How does that resonate with the nation, with Christianity, with military, etc.? But the same power, and Martin Luther King knew this, the same power that resurrected Jesus from the grave is the same power that stands with you in nonviolence. And so there's kind of, again, this is kind of uncharted territory. Martin Luther King kind of dove into that, and we're still talking about him today. But back to this, healing and freedom are possible. They are possible for any single individual. It doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your generation, it doesn't matter how far deep you're in. I think, for one thing, sharing your story, talking about it, and working through it. It requires a sense of vulnerability. It requires a sense of honesty, but I believe that freedom to be worth it. I believe that freedom, that healing to be worth it. There's nothing like this. There's nothing like it. And as Christians, we ought to be witnessing and testifying to our own freedom, to our own story, to our own resurrected life, to other individuals, to the world, but also to each other in church. And I think that this is one area that oftentimes we do not have individuals witnessing. We do not have people giving testimony of, I overcame this with the help of God, with the help of Jesus, with the help of the Spirit, with the help of my community, with the help of my friends, my colleagues, who I'm doing this Bible study with, or this faith sharing group with. This is something that I overcame, and it was something that was very hard for me to do it, but like I said, the same power that resurrected Jesus is the same power that is at our disposal as church, if it is what we believe, and that's what we believe. So healing and freedom are possible, but also there's kind of uncharted territory when it comes to love. So, for example, the crucifix here. This crucifix demonstrates the love that God has for humanity. God sent his only Son into the world so that all who may believe in him, all who may follow him, may have eternal life. God so loved the world that he went to a cross for the sake of humanity. There's a saint, I think it is, I don't remember. Edith Stein, Saint Benedicta of the Cross, she says that if you look through the eyes of Jesus on the cross, you see how God sees the world. And it's, again, what are some of Christ's last words? It's forgiveness, right? Just this forgiveness that flows out of his own love. If you look out from Jesus' eyes on the cross, you see how Jesus sees the world. You see the love that God has for every single individual. And so when it comes to marriage, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to, as Christians operating in the world, we are called to live into this love. We are called to actively love and to give ourselves for the other individual. And we're never done doing this. We've never finished doing this. We've never figured it out either. There's always new situations. There's always new seasons. And this is why we always come back to the cross. We come back to church. We come back to seeing Christ on the cross as a reminder, okay, now in my situation here today, all of this is going on, my relationship with this person, my relationship with my kids. Christ, how do I love like you love us? And so there's a constant meditation, there's a constant returning to this God who loves each and every single one of us with a profound love that he would even give his own life for the sake of everyone, for the sake of humanity. And so when it comes to relationships with other individuals, say spouses, when it comes to our relationship with, if you're an individual and you're not dating, your relationship just with other people, and then with our relationship as Christians in the world, it's like, how can we pull back from the things that are distorting our understanding of love? And then how do we build up this understanding of love? And this, I believe, is uncharted territory. Many of you who've been in relationships or have been doing the life of love, for a while, and you're intentionally returning to the cross, returning to this demonstration of love, you're recognizing, gosh, there's so much depth here. There's so much that I don't know about love, how fulfilling it is, where it takes you, what it does, how it transforms everything. When it comes to pornography, there's a distortion here, and I believe that if we can just pull back from that, and I believe this is possible, if we pull back from that and start to learn more about love, about other individuals, then we can start to teach our communities, our families about this, as opposed to allow this to happen. And this is the good news of Christianity. This is the good news of the church as well, is that we ought to be a people that have our standard for love so high that we are actively giving of ourselves in new ways and new seasons and learning more ourselves about what love is. We look to the cross for that demonstration. But I believe that healing and freedom are possible. And then the hope here is that I don't believe that this distorted view of others, this distorted view of sex that pornography does, has the last word. I believe as a church we have the last word. Christ has the last word. And that's this love that we are continuously challenging ourselves in. Now there are situations, and you all know this, there are situations where when it comes to relationships, like you shouldn't be in the relationship, it's violent, it's abusive, etc. There's a lot of complex situations. But at the same time, there's this standard of love that I believe that we as church ought to emulate into the world. I think that's a response to this distorted understanding of sex and love. How do we restore that which is dignified? How do we show these individuals, even who are involved in the pornography industry, that they have a God who absolutely loves them, and this changes everything. This transforms everything. It transforms us. It sees that, hey, you're not dependent on someone else loving you. You have worth no matter what. Hey, you're not dependent on someone else's what do you call it, presence even, but you have, even in your own individual space, even in your own time, there's a God who absolutely loves you. Yeah. I'm going to go to the third point. The situation is a bleak situation. The hope, there are people who are testifying, there are people who are witnessing, there are people who have overcome this. And I believe as a church, like, we have the final word, and I don't think that sin has the final word, right? We say, oh, death, where is your sting? We believe that the power of the resurrection is the power that's operating in our church, in every single one of us. And I believe that that is extremely hopeful. Now, there are organizations, like I said, there are organizations, and you would find that on this website. It's full of people who believe this. Maybe not in the religious context, but also in the secular context, both, is that we're going to do something about this. We're going to be a people that are deciding to not have this be the last word. We're going to reach out. We're going to break through the taboo. We're going to break through that which is shameful, and we're going to step in and say, hey, there's life over here. Or, hey, you don't need to feel this way. This is another option. This website has a list of material for single people, for married people. For married people, there's a particular page on there as well for women who feel betrayed that their husband is kind of being unfaithful in this regard. And again, I don't want to single out men and women in that way, but again, just another available material, because there's such a high number of men who are kind of using this as in a form, and again, like, how do we remove the shame so that this isn't something like, move past the shame, move past the taboo? How do we bring you to healing? How do we bring you to freedom? How do we bring you and your relationship together? That's my goal. How do we move forward from here? That's my mindset. How do we move forward from here? And I believe that the hope is that all of the material that's on this website, it's people who are in it to win it. It's people who are in it to see success. There are people who have personal victory, personal testimony, and they say, I want to help out other people. We're not going to have pornography have the last word, and we're going to attempt in changing cultures and changing subcultures. I love it, right? I love it, and it's very hopeful. Now, how do we respond? On this website, you have education. You have more of how pornography changes your brain, how it changes your understanding of love, how it changes how we treat other individuals. Again, in a religious and non-religious context, and it also has more information on how this changes culture, how prostitution is often connected, how human trafficking is often connected, how drugs are often connected. I read a statistic this morning that 20% of the industry, and this was just one survey, 20% of the porn industry, the people involved use meth, right? 15% use heroin, 20% use meth. The industry is not a pretty industry. People are abused, people are coerced, not everyone, using drugs, etc. It's not a pretty industry, but I don't think that we're going to go down without a fight. I think that there's individuals who are creating movements that give information, that give education, that are spreading the word about this. So again, on this resource page, you can find education. And then one of the things that I found that is and there's again more information on there about this as well, is accountability software. So this is something that I found to be very strong when it comes to individuals who are trying to move past this or get through this or combat this, is that when it comes to this accountability software, what it does is that you download it onto your app, but you need another individual. And so they allow you, you should probably do this with their permission. You download the app and you put their email address in it. And so whenever you go onto some sort of website that's inappropriate, it flags it and it sends an email to them and says, this individual is looking at this. Which has it's a big power, because you are now bringing that which is shameful, that which is hidden, out into the light, and someone is keeping you accountable. You don't want them, just merely by the fact that you don't want them to have that email. It strengthens your resolve in this. And so you put in someone's email address, and anytime that you are drinking too much, anytime that you are tempted by something else, anytime when nobody is looking and you can do whatever it is that you want, well, there's somebody who's holding you accountable. And again, they chose to hold you accountable, or you invited them to hold you accountable, right? I found that there's so much power with this, that there's just success, because it removes, it brings it out of the darkness and brings it into the light and says, hey, I struggle with this, I have this issue on a regular basis, and I'd like to do something about it. I'd like for you to just be a witness, someone to hold me accountable. You don't even have to do anything, and it strengthens the resolve. Now, when it comes to, this is the final point, when it comes to kids, I think this is a method, this accountability software. We respond by being proactive. as opposed to reacting, right? We respond to by being proactive. And I think that this accountability software is something that is very helpful, especially if you're working with individuals who are your kids and they're under 18. I think you have a responsibility to keep them safe on the internet. If you look at your phone, I preached about this. If you look at your phone, there is a setting in there that's you can see how long you spent on your phone that day, right? I average way too long. I average 6 hours a day. I do work on my phone, so.
Oh yeah.
So that's all. I average 6 hours a day, and I would say for teenagers, and I would challenge teenagers to look at this as well. My generation and below is how often you use your phone. If you go into that, it's probably a lot. And that's everything from text messages to email to calendar to phone call to web browsing, watching videos. We spend a lot of time on our phones, on our technology. And so I think that as parents or as godparents even, we have a responsibility. If a child is spending more than 2 hours a day on their device, it's like, gosh, they're vulnerable, I would say, because I have this understanding that pornography is seeking us out, and it's very easy to be accessed. And so how do we protect our kids that are on technology for a very long period of time? I have to protect myself because I'm on my phone for 6 hours a day, right? Anyone who has drinking problems, you can if you live nearby a bar or a liquor store, it's like spending 6 hours or 5 hours or whatever just around the corner near that place, and you kind of like you can go in anytime, right? Nobody cares, etc. But how do we, as a church, how do we proactively keep our kids safe? How do we proactively guard our kids who are vulnerable? Because again, it consumes us as opposed to us seeking it out. It's finding ways to do it bigger, better, stronger, creeping in. You can check your spam folder, right? Your spam folder is it's crazy. It gets weird. But I think that's the last point. And so for parents who have kids, I think honest discussion and then setting expectations for technology, and then having that accountability software. You can be that accountability partner in that sense. There's also filters, website filters. If you call your cell phone provider, you can do filters that way. But then also having this honest conversation with your kids or with your significant other or with a family member. And that may be the most uncomfortable conversation, but you could also save them from a lifetime of difficulty. And so I'd like to wrap it up there with transfiguration.com/safehaven. This was just a website that I put together with all these resources. But again, what is the situation? The situation is it's a difficult situation that we're in. It affects every single generation. It's not just our kids. It affects men and women, and it affects the entire world. The entire world now, I believe that over 50%, majority of the world, have internet access. And so this is something that people have at their disposal immediately for free, etc. The majority of the world. What is the hope? There are people who are witnessing. There are people who are doing something about it. And I believe that as a church, we have the power on our side that is the power that has raised Christ. And so that's the power that we can tap into in creating a subculture, a culture that is responding proactively. And then, we respond together as church, as sinners that lean into Christ, who really wants to deliver us into freedom and deliver us into healing. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, I'm gonna get a drink real quick. Sorry, that was like, I was like, hey, 30 minutes.